Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Premier Jason Kenney was in Lethbridge on Wednesday. We will explain what brought the UCP leader to the Windy City. Stats Canada came out with its crime severity index, and Lethbridge was ranked at the top. We have a reaction from both the Lethbridge Police and Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaks out about a potential strike by border agents at the Canada-US border.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and Finance Minister Travis Toews visited Lethbridge discussing the current state of the Alberta economy. Kenney also addressed the ongoing negotiations with the nurses union in our province. Micah Quinn has the details.
The potential of a 4% pay cut for Alberta healthcare workers is currently being negotiated in our province. Alberta Finance Minister Travis Toews says the province has economic and fiscal realities to deal with.
Alberta can no longer afford to be an outlier. We can no longer afford to be spending $10 billion more per year on a per capita basis. And so we're working to thoughtfully and carefully, compassionately bring our costs of delivering government services down to be in line with other provinces.
NDP finance critic and Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips says it's unfair to Alberta's healthcare workers to throw this 4% pay cut at their feet, especially when Albertans are just coming out of a pandemic.
This reveals a fundamental failure of priorities. No wonder Albertans do not trust his leadership on either the economy or the management of the pandemic. It's mean-spirited, it is unnecessary, and fundamentally reflects a massive disrespect for our healthcare system and everyone who needs to use it.
Premier Kenney says his party was elected to focus on jobs, the economy, and pipelines. He says the party will continue to implement these goals moving forward.
Here's the reality. We have a $16 billion deficit. We've been running massive deficits for a decade. We can't continue to do that. And this government will not raise taxes to pay for that overspending. We're asking everybody to play some small part in operating more efficiently, and I think that's what taxpayers expect. I know that some people don't share those views, and they can express that, and they certainly will at the ballot box in the next election.
Negotiations are still ongoing between the province and unions for the healthcare sector. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Alberta government has put in $45 million to help families in our province that are earning up to $90,000 to assist with childcare costs. $10 a day childcare negotiations, however, are still ongoing between the UCP and Ottawa.
So our request to the federal government is give us the flexibility to respect parental choice when it comes to childcare. Don't tell us there's only one way or the highway, and that way for them is 8 to 4 urban, union-run daycare centers. That only addresses the needs of about 20% of parents. So we don't think that's good enough. We're more ambitious to support all parental choices.
Well, I think the sticking point, unfortunately, is that Jason Kenney is deeply out of touch with regular Alberta families who are struggling to raise their children while paying all the other bills at the same time. And as a result, he's letting his very, very blinkered, old-fashioned ideology get in the way of making a decision that will help Alberta's economy, help Alberta's job creators, help women, help families overall, and heaven forbid, actually create better learning and care conditions in many cases for our kids.
4 other regions have since signed agreements with the federal government for the $10 a day childcare program. They include British Columbia, Nova Scotia, PEI, and the Yukon. When you go to the polls this October for the municipal election, City Council voted to add another question to the ballot regarding whether the city should prioritize plans for a possible third traffic bridge over the Oldman River. Mayor Chris Spearman says if the city ended up footing the entire bill, property taxes could increase 13%.
To this point, people have to recognize that the third bridge would be entirely within the city of Lethbridge, so it would not be a provincial bridge like Highway 3. So different provincial governments over time have said that bridge is entirely the cost to the city of Lethbridge, in other words, to city of Lethbridge taxpayers. But if we had a referendum that had strong support for a third bridge, what provincial government who wanted to win seats in this city in the future could say, we're not going to fund a third bridge in the city of Lethbridge?
The new Chinook Trail River Crossing Bridge is currently set for a $4 million preliminary design in 2027. That means the project will go back to Council at the next capital improvement plan before being approved. The City of Lethbridge has heard numerous concerns about the current aesthetics and upkeep of city parks due to the parks budget being slashed in November of last year. The parks budget was cut by just under $600,000. Councillor Blaine Hagan, who brought the motion forward, says he was satisfied to only ask Council for $100,000 for the remainder of the year to help with the upkeep for our city parks.
I looked at what our budget is for the parks, and we're actually quite efficient in the way currently that we do that. We saw some of the numbers in the resolution, and so I thought it was definitely okay to put some more funding in there. What I would like to see, again, is just a real boost and get some of the larger weeds and some of these bigger concerns that people have been complaining about dealt with in a quick and efficient manner.
The original resolution would have seen $404,500 go back to the parks budget in 2022. Statistics Canada has released its Crime Severity Index for 2020, and unfortunately, Lethbridge took first place. The CSI rating is based on the number of crimes reported to law enforcement agencies, with more serious incidents given a greater weight. Carson Marsouk has the details.
For the second year in a row, Lethbridge has hit first place on Stats Canada Crime Severity Index with a rating of 138.7. In comparison, the national average is set at 73.4. Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh says a large portion of the rating is believed to be from petty crimes.
This is not an unsafe city. When you look at the types of crime that are happening, a lot of them are opportunity crime.
Lethbridge ranked at number 5 in the category of violent crimes such as homicides, assaults, violent firearm offenses, and robbery. There were also 764 drug offenses recorded in 2020, up nearly 24% from 2011.
Drugs fuel a lot of crime types, especially when you look at property crimes. A lot of it in this city or anywhere I've lived is driven through because of drugs. And these are very desperate people.
The second highest ranked community is Kelowna, BC at 111.9. Lethbridge did drop down almost 3% from 141.8 in 2019, and Mayor Chris Spearman says having agencies and support coming to Lethbridge is a welcomed sight.
When a city like Lethbridge is scoring higher than cities like Edmonton and Calgary, the first conclusion I come to is that one, we have big city problems in a city like Lethbridge, and two, we don't have the resources to deal with it.
Both Mayor Spearman and Chief Medizadeh say the community can help stop these crimes and lower the rate by doing their due diligence.
As long as we're an easy target for criminals to commit crime, we're going to see these numbers, period. And I can have 1,000 more police officers in this city, but if people still leave their keys in their vehicles, leave their doors open, etc., the crime is going to happen.
In November of 2020, City Council cut the police budget by $1 million. Medizadeh says they will maintain the service delivery currently in place, but 2022 is a whole different story. For Bridge City News, I'm Carson Marsouk.
An incident involving a Lethbridge police officer getting shot by a suspect using an airsoft pistol could have unfolded very differently last Thursday had officers decided to return fire. According to the criminal code, if an officer perceives an imminent threat to themselves or the public, they can draw their weapon and fire back. Acting Inspector Pete Christos, who's in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division at the LPS, recounts the split-second decision surrounding how this incident unfolded.
The officer relayed that shots were fired. He took cover, and subsequently this individual threw the weapon away and was taken into custody. Did he feel that it was a real weapon at the time? I can tell you that I don't know what the officers was thinking at the time. That's a very dynamic situation, and these officers make a split-second decision in how they're responding. Now, I would tell you that because the officer took cover immediately, of course, looked at to where he felt getting hit and didn't see that there was any injury to him, he realized that it was an airsoft pistol at that time. We deal with things in the moment, and unfortunately, there are times where our officers are making split-second decisions, and so, of course, subject to public scrutiny at times, but we're very well trained, and I'm glad that this situation turned out the way it did.
The officer suffered minor injuries and did not require medical attention. The suspect, 30-year-old Lance Fred Chalifo, has been charged with numerous offenses, including pointing a firearm and assaulting a police officer with a weapon. Alberta Health says 71 cases of COVID-19 were likely acquired at the Calgary Stampede, where more than 500,000 people attended the 10-day event. Government officials say so far it was not a significant driver in rising infections across the province. Alberta has around 1,200 active cases, with just over 60% located in the Calgary zone. One doctor who advised the Stampede says the new cases acquired at the Stampede represent less than 10% of the province's new cases. The family of a woman killed in an Edmonton hotel say justice has been served after a judge put the killer behind bars for 12 and a half years. A jury found former Ontario truck driver Bradley Barton guilty of manslaughter in the death of Cindy Gladieux, a 36-year-old Métis and Cree woman who was left to die in a bathtub after being sexually assaulted in 2011. Gladieux's daughter, Cheyenne, said the heartache from her mother's death will live on forever. Barton's lawyer says his client plans on appealing his conviction.
There's several strong grounds of appeal, I think, starting with the division of powers, how only Parliament creates criminal offences. It's not left to judges to create criminal offences. Here, this trial judge was urged by the Crown to create a criminal offence, basically of a sexual assault, manslaughter, where even though the victim may be consenting, that consent is vitiated if a reasonable person would have foreseen the real risk of bodily harm occurring. That's not a criminal offense in our submission.
Sentencing arguments have been postponed until September 13th for a Calgary pastor and his brother convicted for deliberately violating COVID-19 health orders. The lawyer for Pastor Archer Pulowski and his brother Dawood requested the delay because Alberta Health Services is preparing further affidavits against her clients. AHS indicated it would be seeking 21 days behind bars for both men arrested in May for allegedly organizing an illegal gathering. Justice Adam Germain said last month that AHS had proven that the two men were guilty of contempt. The Director of Fire Centre Operations for the BC Wildfire Service says daily ignitions have subsided due to a lack of lightning and more stable weather. That has helped crews fighting some 250 fires burning across the province. Rob Schweitzer says winds have eased, limiting fire growth despite hotter than normal temperatures for much of southern BC this week. He says that this season is far above the 10-year average, as more than 1,200 fires have burned over 4,000 square kilometers since April. He says the 10-year average for the same period is around 642 fires, or 1,050 square kilometers burned. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he hopes for no disruptions at the Canada-U.S. border as federal officials work toward negotiations following a vote by 9,000 border employees in favor of striking. Unions representing the workers say its members may strike as soon as August 6th. That's 3 days before fully vaccinated U.S. citizens will be able to visit Canada without having to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Obviously, we will be working very closely with the CVSA union to make sure that we're negotiating, getting to the bargaining table, trying to figure out a path forward. It's been a tough year for everyone. It's been a tough year for people in just about every line of work, but the border guards have been challenged with reduced numbers, yes, but also an increase in things that they've had to verify as people have come through the border, come across our border for essential travel. So we recognize that there have been challenges, but we're going to work with them, and we're hopeful that there won't be any disruption.
So if the border agents do go on strike, what will that mean for Canadians? Political reporter Brian Lilly gives us his thoughts.
This is going to be a problem because, again, it's not just the land border officers. We're all used to seeing them. That you drive up, you show them your passport, or back in the old days, your driver's license. They ask you if you have any fruit, and they wave you in. It will also be the border agents that check you out at customs when you come through on an international flight. So this could grind everything to a halt and really stop that potential for a return of international travel.
Mr. Lilly will also explain why the Trudeau Liberals may be a little bit nervous about potentially calling an election next month. He'll have more details coming up in the second half of our program. The Summer Olympics continue in Tokyo, Japan. Maud Sharon is Canada's second gold medalist at the Games. She won the women's 64-kilogram weightlifting competition. Sharon's title came a day after Canada's Maggie McNeil won gold in swimming. It appears as though more and more people of faith are being targeted around the world through so-called polite persecution. That's when governments impose restrictions limiting how you can express your faith. But at a recent Religious Freedom Summit in Washington, D.C., correspondent Jennifer Wishon saw firsthand how a growing number of people are joining forces to put a stop to it.
Most people in the world, 80%, live in countries where their religious activity is restricted by their government, and increasingly that persecution is severe. This week, people from across the globe representing 30 different faith traditions are gathering here in Washington to promote religious freedom.
Please keep praying for my brother. Thank you so much.
Some came to advocate for loved ones. Survivors told their stories.
Persecution is very hard.
Miriam Ibrahim made headlines when she refused to recant her Christian faith despite a death sentence in Sudan.
It's choice that, and because we are the Christian, know our freedom is in Jesus.
Terserne Zayawudin is a Uyghur Muslim who managed to escape from a concentration camp in China. Her pain is palpable. She and other women were regularly raped, subjected to electric shock, and humiliated for the crime of their faith. Now she can't escape thoughts of her people continuing to suffer.
Sometimes I think it would be better if I were back in the homeland with them, even if it meant death. I'm so shocked that the world is just sitting by and watching. The Chinese government has absolutely no shame about this.
No matter their motivation, religious freedom advocates agree they receive much more than they give.
They have a message to keep our identity, to keep our faith in Christ.
There's no downside to religious freedom. Countries that practice tolerance enjoy greater stability and prosperity. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
It was on this day that World War I began. A U.S. Army bomber crashed into the Empire State Building in New York, and former U.S. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was born. This is Today in History for July 28th.
July 28th, 1914. Start of World War I, as Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and the rest of Europe's major powers soon join the fighting. War breaks out a month after a Serb nationalist assassinates Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo, in what's now Bosnia-Herzegovina. 1932. In Washington, U.S. troops forcibly dispersed the so-called bonus army of World War I veterans during the Great Depression. The veterans had gathered to demand the immediate payment of money for their military service that they were scheduled to receive in a dozen years' time. 1945. In New York City, an accident at what's then the tallest structure in the world. A U.S. Army bomber crashes into the 79th floor of the Empire State Building, killing 14 people. 1929. Former First Lady Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis is born in Southampton, New York. Her years in the White House, which she later dubbed Camelot, ended in tragedy when her husband, President John F. Kennedy, was assassinated in Dallas.
The knowledge of the affection in which my husband was held by all of you has sustained me, and the warmth of these tributes is something I shall never forget.
And 1866. Beatrix Potter, the writer and illustrator, whose children's books include The Tale of Peter Rabbit, is born in London. Today in History, July 28th. Camille Bohannon, The Associated Press.
Well, we had a small break from the heat here in southwestern Alberta with some light showers. There's a chance we may receive even a little more moisture. Full weather details are on deck. It was great to see our region receive a little bit of moisture, but we need a lot more of water for our crops and lawns here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Roche is back with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we may see a little more rain again this evening.
Yeah, that's right. We are looking at about a 30% chance of showers this evening with a risk of a thunderstorm overnight. Back up into the 30s tomorrow as Environment Canada has issued that heat warning in effect again for much of southern Alberta, including Lethbridge, Tabor, and the Milk River areas. So temperatures will be very hot. We're looking at sunshine tomorrow, 33 degrees, 31 for Friday, up to 33 again on Saturday, 32 on Sunday, 30 on Monday, and rounding out that 7-day forecast with 27 degrees on Tuesday with a mix of sun and clouds. So definitely going to be a hot one, absolutely. 26 is our average high for this time of year. Average low at 10 degrees. 39 was our high temperature back in 1939. And in 1995, we had our chilliest, which was 5 degrees. 5:57 is when the sun rose this morning and our sunset this evening, 9:19 p.m. I don't know if you're noticing, days getting a little bit shorter. I'm noticing it a bit in the evenings now. There is a high pressure ridge creeping into the south coast, it's going to be bringing very hot temperatures later this week, but Victoria and Vancouver both sitting at 27 and 26 degrees with lots of sunshine. 29 for both Edmonton and Calgary. Lots of sunshine tomorrow. Also a bit of fog in the morning though, as Edmonton's going to be having some overnight thunderstorms there. 27 the high in Saskatoon with sunny, hazy skies and 20 km/h winds. Same thing for Regina. 26 there though. 28 the high for Winnipeg. So all three of those prairie cities looking at hazy conditions tomorrow. In Toronto though, 23 and a chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm. Same thing for Ottawa tomorrow. 21 degrees the high there though. 25 the high in Montreal tomorrow with a chance of showers there as well. As we look over to the east coast of Fredericton, looking at a lot of sunshine tomorrow. Beautiful temperature, 25 degrees, 24 in Halifax. Sunny skies and 23 in Charlottetown, 22 in St. John's, Newfoundland with a mix of sun and cloud and some wind gusts there as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Jeff Reimer of Royal LePage South Country Real Estates, 403-380-1779.
Stats Canada says the annual rate of inflation dropped last month to 3.1%. The reading for the Consumer Price Index is down from 3.6% recorded in May. That was the largest yearly increase in 10 years. Stats Can says gasoline prices were up 32% last month year over year. That is down from 43.4% spike in May after prices partially recovered following the start of the pandemic. The agency says inflation grew at a slower pace in June due to a slowdown in retail, including women's clothing. Shopify's revenue has crossed the $1 billion mark for the first time in a single quarter as the volume of goods sold through its offerings reached a record level. Shopify's revenue for the quarter was up 57% from a year ago to $1.1 billion US. Its gross merchandise value, which is a metric measuring the total dollar value of orders through its platform, was up 40% to $42.2 billion. Loblaw Company's second quarter earnings soared 120%, even as sales leveled off compared with the stockpiling frenzy at the start of the pandemic. Canada's biggest grocery chain said food retail dropped for the first time since the onset of lockdowns, while in-store traffic increased. Food same-store sales were down 0.1% from the second quarter, while e-commerce sales declined by 0.5%. But net income attributable to common shareholders jumped from $169 to $375 million. Revenues were also up overall 4.6% to $12.49 billion. Starbucks is reporting sales at stores open at least a year jumped 73% in the company's third quarter. The Seattle-based coffee giant was hit hard by the pandemic when many stores were closed and same-store sales tumbled 40%. Starbucks reported net income of $1.15 billion and says revenue soared 78% to an all-time high of $7.5 billion. The company's shares, however, fell after it lowered its forecast for sales growth in China, which is its second largest market outside of the United States. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 57 points to 20,230. The Dow was down 127.59 to 34,930. The S&P 500 was down just under a point to 4,400. The Nasdaq was up 102 points to 14,762. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 70 cents to 72.36 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to 4.04 US. Gold was up 3 cents to 18.07 US an ounce. Silver was down slightly at 24.96 US an ounce. Wheat is at $400 per metric ton. Barley is at $400. Canola, $887. And corn is at $435 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 15 cents to 123.08. Feeder cattle were down 53 cents to 160.18. Lean hogs were down $1.78 to 105.70. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to finish at 79.84 US.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney heard from angry nurses earlier today in Lethbridge. The nurses' union was unhappy and protesting a potential 4% wage cut the UCP government has proposed during the recent negotiations with the nurses' union. The Trudeau Liberals may be a little bit nervous about calling an election next month. Political reporter Brian Lilley will explain why in just a moment. Well, we heard last week that Canada was going to reopen the border to American travelers next month, but now it may not happen because of a strike by border officers. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter and one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley. Brian, could these border agents actually strike, and what would that mean for our border?
It would mean slowdown after slowdown after slowdown, and not just at land border crossings. Of course, Americans, well, people from all over the world have been able to fly into Canada. The idea that we shut down non-essential travel at our airports is ridiculous when you look at the numbers. Absolutely, travel decreased, but not to the level you might think. But the land border was definitely closed off for anyone that didn't have a valid reason for driving across. Well, now we're looking at the fact that 8,500 border guards who are members of a specific division of the Public Service Alliance of Canada have voted 90% in favor of striking. And their strike date, Hal? August 6th. That's just 3 days before the border's supposed to open up for fully vaccinated Americans to be able to come into Canada, and just a month before fully vaccinated international travelers from other countries should be able to come in. So this is going to be a problem because, again, it's not just the land border officers. We're all used to seeing them that, you drive up, you show them your passport, or back in the old days, your driver's license. They ask you if you have any fruit and they wave you in. It will also be the border agents that check you out at customs when you come through on an international flight. So this could grind everything to a halt and really stop that potential for a return of international travel.
Now, while the plan is to open our border to our American neighbors, the U.S. is not quite as accommodating. They're not doing the same for us, as travel restrictions will continue to be in place. Brian, what does that mean for the average Canadian who wants to head south?
Well, for people like my parents who want to go to their place in Florida, check up on their property there, it means that they can't go. They were looking forward to heading down in early August. They're normally snowbirds. They spend 5 to 6 months a year there. Small, modest place, but it's what you need as a senior. And they were hoping that to go and see the place they haven't seen in a year and a half. They don't want to go without their car, so they could fly down, rent a car, go through a lot of expense and a lot of hassle, but they're not able to drive down right now because the Americans have said no. But the Americans this week also said no to a host of other countries throughout the European Union, Britain, China, Indonesia, all kinds of countries. They're saying, nope, our travel restrictions are staying in place. And one of the reasons they're giving is the Delta variant. The Delta variant is a bigger problem in the United States than it is in some of these other countries. The United Kingdom has had an upswing in cases of the Delta variant. So the problem is within the U.S. borders, but they're using the idea of keeping travelers out as a way that makes sense. Once upon a time, maybe that would have made sense, but right now I think we need to be more concerned about Americans coming here with COVID than going the other way.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is asking more Canadians to get vaccinated. In fact, the Prime Minister says that less than 1% of those hospitalized for COVID-19 are now fully vaccinated people.
Yeah, and Hal, look, I think that that's probably accurate, but we need better information to know for sure. That's not a stat that I or most journalists are able to verify, but we do know that the vaccines that have been approved in Canada are working. They are stopping people from getting seriously ill. They are stopping deaths from going up. We've seen that since December. That's why the third wave that we experienced across the country was nowhere near as deadly as previous waves. So it is something that we need to consider, but we also have to start looking at how we report on COVID-19. And one of the things that we have to get away from is the case count, because when we get to September and October, case counts are going to go up again, and that will freak people out. A lot of people will get panicked and nervous and demand that we go back into lockdowns. But if we're just having case counts go up, Hal, but we're not having corresponding rise in hospitalizations or deaths, like what they've dealt with in Britain. They've had a dramatic increase in case counts, but not an increase in hospitalizations or deaths. If we follow their pattern, there's no need for us to go into further lockdowns. And yet we're getting into fights over that already. We're getting into fights over the idea that you need a vaccine passport to go to a restaurant or a grocery store or to get your hair cut.
Brian, we saw a spike of COVID positive flights from the hotspot that was Great Britain last December and then India back in April. Now, the number crunching shows that we're on pace to surpass the number of COVID positive international flights this month compared to India in the spring. Where's the hotspot now?
The hotspot now is directly south of us, Hal. It's in the United States. It's not to the level that India was back in April. Back then, about 50% of the positive cases that were showing up at our airports were coming from India alone, and that's why the government shut down flights from India. They haven't resumed. We're expecting that to happen sometime in the fall. But the United States is becoming an exporter of COVID. I believe the second highest is Amsterdam, followed by Mexico. So in terms of the number of flights coming in, but we are seeing more flights coming in with COVID positive people. This is something that we have to be concerned about. Even as we reopen our economy, we still have to be worried about people coming in, bringing in new variants. Are they quarantining properly? I have not advocated for shutting down airports or the borders, Hal, but I have been in favor of saying, look, you're coming from outside, we need to test you, and you may need to quarantine. These are long-standing practices that countries have used to keep disease outside, and they've been used for a long time because when done right, they work. We just haven't always done them right.
Brian, we had a new Governor General installed on Monday. Mary Simon is the first Inuk Canadian to hold the post. Now, you've been to some of these swearing-in ceremonies before, and this one was a little more subdued by comparison?
Oh, I think the total number of people was 44. So a much smaller, more intimate ceremony in keeping with the times, in keeping with the fact that so many people still nervous, so many people still in lockdown. It would seem wrong to actually do what we've done before. Hundreds of people packed onto the ramp up to Center Block on Parliament Hill. Of course, they're not using Center Block, but where you and I used to work. Yeah. Coming into that setting, having the House of Commons packed, not only with every member of Parliament, but every senator, every Supreme Court justice, invited guests. When I saw Michaëlle Jean sworn in, when I saw David Johnson sworn in, these were lavish events. David Johnson arriving in an open horse and carriage to show up for the event. Michaëlle Jean, they had a choir lining the hall from the Senate singing as she came out. So these are different times, and this was a much more subdued message. But Mary Simon, now the first Inuk woman to, or Inuk Canadian, period, to hold the position, and someone that has been relatively well received outside of those complaining that she does not speak French.
So, Brian, do you think that the Prime Minister will be visiting the new Governor General anytime soon to ask for an election? Will the writ be dropped?
I'm still thinking it will, but I also know from speaking with people that the Liberals in the PMO are getting nervous. They're getting nervous about the idea that they go it right now. The talk had been somewhere between August 7th and August 15th. The money is now switched over towards the middle of August because Nova Scotian has an election and Nova Scotians go to the polls on August 17th. So they don't want too much of an overlap there. But you add into that the fact that we're still dealing with the pandemic. People are still nervous, Hal. People are dealing with high inflation and a high unemployment rate. And we could find out shortly whether Justin Trudeau is going to face a fourth ethics investigation. So there is a back and forth within the government right now about whether they call an election in the middle of August with voting day in the middle to late of September.
Now, on one of Trudeau's campaign-style stops this week, he announced that his government is holding back healthcare funding from New Brunswick over abortion access. What is that all about?
The Prime Minister actually said it was millions of dollars that he was withholding from New Brunswick from the healthcare funding envelope due to their lack of providing funding for abortion in private clinics. It turns out it's, at this point, just $140,000, but it could go up. We'll see. New Brunswick provides abortion services in just 3 pre-approved hospitals. It does not provide abortion funding in private clinics. But the government has decided that this is something that must happen, the Trudeau government, that is. In New Brunswick, both Liberal and Conservative governments over the years have not been the cheerleaders of abortion that you find in Ottawa. And so this is in keeping with what the public wants. But Justin Trudeau, as Blaine Higgs, the progressive Conservative premier of New Brunswick, said, every time there's an election, Justin Trudeau brings up the issue of abortion. And Higgs is right. This is, to me, another sign that we are headed towards the polls because he wants to use this as an issue to rally his base. We don't see the Prime Minister going around and saying, well, you're not doing knee operations in private hospitals, and hey, over there, why aren't you doing cataracts in this place or that place? No, they're always talking about protecting the public nature of healthcare and don't fund private clinics. But when it comes to abortion, as you remember, there used to be, and I believe there still is, an abortion clinic just steps from Parliament Hill, and it gets funding all the time. And MPs who denounce private or public dollars going to private clinics support that one. That's what's going on here. This is pure politics, plain and simple.
Now, another reason you pointed to a potential election is a one-time payment to seniors that will be sent out in August. And now we're learning that many of these payments could go to people who've actually died. Like, I know sometimes politicians are, trying to get votes, but these people have passed on, Brian.
Yeah, it's one of the strange things of government. We hear at every election, a voting card shows up for someone who long ago passed on. In this case, it could be checks. Look, the Trudeau Liberals have decided that the week of August 16th, they're going to start making payments of $500. It's a one-time windfall payment, Hal. It's not taxable. It won't affect anything else. You get an extra $500 and you get an extra $500, and they're a bit like Oprah for seniors. Everyone's getting $500, and it's happening just as we're expected to go to the polls. But a briefing note to the minister in charge, Deb Shute, told her back in May, given the way this is going out, given that it's mostly to people over the age of 75, we could be looking at many people who have passed on getting extra payments, and it will be difficult to get them back. The government is just ignoring this, moving forward with it. They want the votes. They're not too concerned about where the money goes.
Brian, the Prime Minister, who's a big fan of the Montreal Canadiens, who went to the Stanley Cup Finals this year, was very critical of the team drafting an 18-year-old player. Why is that?
The player's name is Logan Mailloux. He's an 18-year-old. He was considered a top draft prospect. And then just before the draft, he said to all the teams in the NHL, don't draft me. I made a mistake. I am not worthy of being drafted right now. I need to make amends. And the reason is this young man who used to play for the London Knights had gone over to Europe when the Ontario Hockey League was shut down due to COVID. Now, while there, he became engaged in a relationship with a woman, consensual relationship, but he shared intimate images of her with his teammates, something that is both morally wrong but also illegal, I believe both here and there. So he told the teams, look, don't draft me. I need to make amends for this. The Canadians took him. The Prime Minister, who has his own issues with groping, with his treatment of women, with blackface and everything else, showed that he doesn't believe in second chances for others. Logan Mailloux definitely made a mistake. The woman on the other end of this relationship has said all she wanted was an apology, which I believe she's had. But Justin Trudeau is someone who has broken trust many times and gotten second, third, fourth, and fifth chances, but showed that in this case, he doesn't believe it because he said it was absolutely wrong. Are there problems with the Habs drafting him, given the situation? Sure. But for the Prime Minister, a person in his position to be making that statement, I think goes too far. That's between Mailloux, the woman in question, the team, and perhaps to a degree their fans, but not the Prime Minister of the country to denounce an 18-year-old man when he has made so many mistakes and had so many second, third, fourth, and fifth chances.
Toronto Sun columnist and one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal.
The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all of us, from our health to job losses. It's also impacted many of our homeless population. To talk about some of the challenges of our homeless, the working poor, and those with serious addictions is Ken Kissick. He's the co-founder of Streets Alive Mission here in Lethbridge. Ken, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Can you share a little bit about how the street population has responded to the pandemic and how they fared so far here in our city?
The pandemic has been hard on our street population, not so much from the point of view of the actual disease of COVID. A lot of them have managed to get through that without too much difficulty, but it's the closing of a lot of services and things that they were used to accessing, the library, the provincial building. And it created a real problem in them being able to get into certain places or through the winter. A lot of stores and places were closed, so it was cold. Here through the heat wave, now that we're just opening, it was difficulty to find places for them to be able to get in. All their normal things were lost. And so there was a group of us. Streets Alive became a warming center. It became a cooling center. Right now, in the midst of all the smoke and everything else, people are able to come in, get out from the air quality. Kind of the upside of having a bunch of masks around is now the masks are advantageous during the smoke. But it's been hard on them.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't breathe in a lot of that particulate matter, when it comes to the smoke. You're right, the poor air quality. Ken, have you noticed an increase in the homeless population or maybe in the number of addictions because of the pandemic with people losing their jobs?
The other thing that we certainly have noticed is in the area of addictions. The drug use, the number of cases that we deal with in terms of overdoses has certainly gone up. Now there was a kind of a combination of the fact that the one site, the supervised consumption site, was shut down, which created some problems. But the other has been the lack of actually the pure drugs because the borders closed. There's been a lot of dirty drugs that have shown up, and it's created a problem. We have seen haven't seen that much of an increase in the homeless population because of job loss, but there's always the transient population, and our homeless population is becoming more significant as the city itself grows. One of the upsides that's been here because of COVID is the Blood Tribe Band has done an excellent job of really stepping up, looking to help their people. And they opened 2 shelters out on the reserve through the winter months. They have a much better addictions and healthcare system. So we're trying to move people to them, but we still have a population of people here in the community that are struggling with addictions and drugs, alcohol that create the problems that put them on the street.
Ken, does your ministry work with the Sage Clan as well? I know they're out helping a lot of the homeless, with water bottles and such. Do you work with that organization as well?
Yeah, actually, one of the greatest things that happened through COVID was the creation originally of the City of Lethbridge COVID response group. We used a communication item called Slack, and we created this group. Streets Alive was asked by the city to lead the addictions and recovery pod and the outreach and basic needs pods. But what has happened is that is now called Lethbridge Helping Organizations, and we have really banded together. So as an example, going into the summer, we knew we were going to need water. The 2 food banks led that up and reached out. Instead of a bunch of us kind of reaching out, we have close to 40,000 bottles of water available. And so organizations like the Sage Clan, the helping agencies, My City Care that has their outreach to the prostitutes, everybody was able to access that water. It's been great. This is the first year that we've actually been proactive rather than reactive. And yes, we work with the Sage Clan. We're working with the the group that is transporting people out to the reserve. Any way we can help that population, we're working with groups.
So it sounds like you've got a good handle on the water situation. What about other supplies the ministry may need, including maybe masks, especially right now during the smoky conditions?
Again, because we were declared an essential service at the beginning of this, we were able to access PPE through the government. They recently they've been pushing out the supplies, the oversupply they have, and so we're well stocked, courtesy of the government.
Now, can you give us an update on the Segway home? I know it was a little controversial when it was set up on the city's south side, but it seems to be making a big difference in the lives of women who are in need of a safe place.
Actually, the Segway home has been open since December 3rd. It's been a bit of a learning curve because we were moving from managing 4 women to now up to as many as 17. Currently have 9. But yes, it's making a huge difference in the ability for us to be able to help women in recovery. As well, our men's program has grown. We've acquired another housing unit that houses 16 men in our stage 2 recovery. And so both our men's and women's recovery program are in growth mode right now.
So Ken, talk to me a little bit more about the Exodus Men's Life Recovery Program. Really explain the impact it's having on men in our region here.
Well, so again, one of the things that Streets Alive has been involved in for almost 30 years is helping people recover from addictions. And we've been doing men's programming for 22 years, and we've been doing women's for 10. And we have been enhancing these programs over the last few years. In fact, we are currently actually developing, in the last stages of developing our what we call our addictions recovery psychology portion of that, so that we can actually get accredited, not so much as a treatment center, but as an in-depth recovery center for both the men and the women. We've been excited about our men. We currently have the ability to have 35 men in our program. We currently have about 21. We just graduated our 8th man into who has spent 1 year sobriety, and so that's very exciting for us. We've probably had well over 40 90-day celebrations of guys that have got through 90 days, and so this makes a big difference for a lot of the men in recovery, as well as the women. Our whole purpose is to help them recover, to grow, and to be able to come back into a productive lifestyle. We are faith-based, so a lot of our programming and direction has the biblical worldview edge to it. That people can enter. Faith is not an issue for entry. Most of them, however, when they leave, are people of faith. Because without Christ, we are unable to really totally recover. And it's been really exciting to watch men and women, when they let Christ in, actually move forward in huge leaps. But it's a bit of a walk to get them to that place.
So Ken, what do you say to people who are approached by someone who's homeless, maybe has an addiction issue? Should we send them to you, Streets Alive? How do we handle a situation like that to really help our most vulnerable here in our city?
Right now, if somebody runs across someone who is actively, let's say, using, okay, and they're struggling and they need to go somewhere, they need to send them to Alpha House, which is Alpha House runs not only the emergency shelter, but it also runs the stabilization and detox unit. And they have a system to be able to move them through that. If they are individuals who don't appear to be using, they're just looking, they want to get into recovery, they need a better place, they can certainly be sent to us. But we work hand in hand with Alpha House with Fresh Start Community Recovery Center, that's the old the South Country Treatment Center, and we exchange people back and forth with the idea to get them through into full recovery.
Ken, let's talk about some success stories of people who've maybe gone through your program, came to know Christ, and are now leading a clean, sober life.
Well, I can talk about, I won't use his real name. We'll call him Brian. Brian came to us about 15 months ago, full-blown meth addict. And this was his first time in any kind of treatment or recovery. He was very apprehensive about the faith base. He was not a believer. He didn't believe in God or anything else. About 2 months into the program, he recognized that he needed greater help. He received Christ, and his life dramatically turned. Currently, that Brian is working with us. He's employed by us. He is part of our men's recovery team. He is an assistant, what we call a client assistant. He has regained visitation rights to his daughters. He is establishing himself within the community, fully productive. And he's just one of 5 men that have gone through that, because one of the other things that we do with the men program and the women's program, when they reach a certain point, stage 3, we try and employ them for a period of time, 90-day cycles, which gives them both sobriety and an employment as they reach out. Because a lot of these guys have been out of work for years, and so they need that help.
That's tremendous. Let's talk about maybe help that you may need in the form of more volunteers. How are you doing in that aspect?
The volunteers that we need, because we've made some changes that have just happened in the community, but we still need volunteers with what we're calling our repurpose centers. So that's a new enterprise that also started during COVID, but it's basically sorting through clothing and furniture and stuff like that. We still need some volunteers to make sandwiches, because we are doing a certain amount of help for Alpha House and different places where we're providing sandwiches. And we could use some volunteers just in our pin bank downstairs at the mission. So there's lots of opportunity, and they can just go to our website, go to volunteers, and fill out the application.
Now, Ken, a big part of helping to turn people's lives around is providing a solid education. Tell me a bit more about the Ask Learning Center. What is it all about? So the Ask Learning Center has now been converted into what we call Genesis Connect for Women. Okay, and it's located, we have a separate location from the mission. It is a place where the women who are in the program come. That's where the classes are held. It's also where they do what we call DIY. So there's a creative element to do them. So they do arts, they do glass work, they make certain things, journals and everything else. Those items are then put up for sale at the front end of that building. Now, of course, COVID shut us down for almost well over a year and a bit, but we're hoping to get reopened here by the end of summer, where people will be able to come in, purchase the items that have been made by the women, and then it just helps to run the program. On top of that, again, the men and women we've increased our addictions recovery scope. And so that there's classes that happen there. There's, things that go after what we call the trauma, led by, specialized people. We provide counseling assistance to them. But the Genesis Connect Center is strictly for women. The men's center is actually located in the Repurpose Center. So both have places where they gather, where they're able to come together and enjoy one another. That was one of the biggest pluses
during COVID, because we were declared an emergency or an essential service and recovery was essential, the group limitations didn't apply to our groups. And so they were able to maintain a semblance of community. And so their mental health is a little bit better than others that we've seen.
Ken Kissick is the co-founder of Streets Alive Mission here in Lethbridge. Ken, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, and may you have a great day.
You as well. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.